Trauma isn't always loud, it isn't always shouting or visible scars. Sometimes the deepest trauma comes from a family that looked perfect to everyone else, but felt lonely and hollow on the inside. If you grew up feeling like an ornament rather than a child, or like your own value was your performance, you weren't in a normal family, you were in a toxic system. Here are the 5 family structures that explain exactly why you feel the way you do today. Let's see how many of these systems you recognize yourself in. And keep in mind, these aren't black and white categories. Sometimes you will only see partial similarities, and it's very common to identify with several different systems at once. Number 5, a respected family. This family looks flawless, successful, educated, and always smiling. But the priority isn't love, it's image management. They don't do feelings. Instead of fixing a failing marriage or an addiction, they bury it, believing that having a problem is a sign of weakness. For the children, this is a psychological pressure cooker. You weren't raised to be a person, you were raised to be a trophy. Your value is conditional on your performance. And failure feels like exile. This leaves many adults with a crushing sense of emptiness because they've spent their lives playing a character, never knowing who they actually are. When you question this, they probably gaslight you. They say something like, others had it worse, or you're ungrateful. But you aren't too sensitive, you are simply human. Recovery is realizing your parents were so obsessed with the frame, they completely forgot to look at the painting. Number 4, the desert of empathy. This kind of family is actively hostile, defined by deep-seated contempt rather than just coldness. Driven by untreated trauma, these parents use their children as targets for their own self-hatred. In this house, vulnerability is never protected. It's weaponized. If you were bullied at school, you weren't met with a hug, but with a sneer. What do you want me to do about it? Growing up in this heartbreak zone forces you to become either hypersensitive to every mood shift or to completely freeze. As an adult, this creates a lovability crisis because your blueprint for love was actually a blueprint for betrayal. You likely suspect that kindness is a trap or a prelude to an attack. Recovery is the difficult process of learning that kindness isn't a threat and that you were never the problem. You were simply the scapegoat for their unresolved hatred. Number 3, the crisis factory. Imagine growing up where the only constant is that everything changes by tomorrow. In a chaotic system, life is a blur of high drama or broken promises, like a parent moving out on Tuesday and coming back by Thursday. Without reliability, you learn that plans are meaningless. The adults are so consumed by their own turbulence that they treat you more like a pet than a person. The crisis factory will force a fierce independence that is actually a survival tactic, not a personality trait. You learn to dissociate, to completely leave your body just to survive one crisis crashing into the next. As an adult, this leaves you in a state of emotional transit. You might even struggle to unpack boxes in a new apartment because deep down, you're still waiting for the next disaster to strike. Children need stability and predictability for their nervous system to relax and grow. Without that anchor, whether due to a high-conflict divorce or the displacement of foster care, the brain stays in survival mode. Recovery is about grieving the childhood you spent just trying to stay afloat. It's finally giving yourself permission to stop surviving and start building a life that doesn't move. Number 2, the emotional triangle, the 3-way trap. Imagine a triangle where 2 people in conflict pull in a third person to act as a buffer, messenger, or judge. Instead of facing each other, they leak their tension onto a third party to stabilize the pressure they are too emotionally immature to handle. In a toxic family, this means a child is drafted into a war they never signed up for, forced to carry the emotional weight of their parents' failing relationship. Usually, the adults aren't even aware they're doing it. They're simply using the child as a tool to vent anxiety that doesn't belong to them. This is how we get the classic mama's boy dynamic. If a mother is lonely, depressed, or deeply frustrated in her marriage, she may turn toward her son to fill that emotional void, and that's serious emotional abuse. She smothers him with excessive attention, constantly cools him, restricts him, and uses guilt to keep him close. Sometimes children even unconsciously insert themselves into the marital tension. They step into the crossfire to protect or rescue one parent, trying to create some kind of new balance within a broken system. In doing so, they sacrifice their own childhood to become the emotional glue holding the family together. The consequences for the person caught in the middle are profound. When you are triangulated, you lose your right to be a child. You become a mini adult responsible for the emotional stability of the house. This leads to chronic people-pleasing and problems with setting boundaries. Ultimately, triangulation robs you of your own identity, leaving you exhausted from balancing a triangle that was never yours to hold. Recovery is about stepping off the points of that triangle and letting the two original people face their own mess. Number 1, slaves to addiction. In this system, addiction is a failed attempt to numb pain. A parent who lacks the skills to face their fear or emptiness uses substances like alcohol to regulate their emotions instead of turning to healthy relationships, for example. This addiction becomes a wall built to keep the world out, but it ends up locking the family in. Life here is a masterclass in hypervigilance. You learn to read the clink of a hidden bottle or the way a key turns in the lock to gauge if the night will be okay. Forced to ignore the truth for the sake of the family secret, you become a survivalist, tracking micro-expressions to avoid the next explosion or the suffocating silence of a blackout. Growing up in this shadow turns children into hyper-vigilant fixers. Since you couldn't rely on your parents, you took on the job of stabilizing the whole house, and as an adult you may struggle to relax and find yourself drawn to people who need saving because fixing feels safer than being cared for. Recovery is realizing you were never responsible for your parents' sobriety. It's okay to stop being the sentinel and start living for yourself. If you saw yourself in these systems, remember, you are not the problem. Your anxiety, perfectionism, and hypervigilance aren't flaws. They're survival skills you built to navigate a very unsafe environment. But you don't have to stay in survival mode anymore. You are no longer the trophy, the shield, or the family anchor. Healing starts with exactly what you just did. Naming the system, realizing that the weight you carry was never yours to hold. Which of these systems resonated with you the most? Share your story in the comments. It reminds others they're not alone. Thank you for being here.